Hello there friends and welcome. For today's Solasta guide we have all of the best spells in the game, and we truly are covering everything here from Wizard, Sorcerer, Warlock, Druid and Cleric as well, level by level. Mastering your spellcasting abilities is of course key to ensuring victory, including buffs, debuffs, crowd control and damage spells. First, with how the most important spellcasting mechanics work. Now, I've already covered how concentration works in my previous guide, but to put it simply, you can only have one concentration spell effect on at the same time. Anyways, I want to now focus into how to increase your spell level and its benefits. First, it's important to note that in Solasta you can actually increase the level of your spells at will, which results in more castings of course, because you will then use the corresponding spell level. For example, I have 3 level 3 slots and Fireball is a level 3 spell by default. If I click on the plus icon here, I can also cast it as a level 4, 5 or 6 spell, which will then use the corresponding spell level slots. It's not just about having more castings, it also increases the power of certain spells, and for that all you have to do is check at the tab that says at higher levels. For Fireball, per slot level over 3 we get +1 die, which means a level 4 Fireball will now deal 9d6 instead of 8d6 damage and so on. For other spells like Banishment it can add more targets, also very useful. But usually it's mostly about damage boosts. Second, some spells can actually be cast as a bonus action, most importantly Misty Step, to let's say teleport your character away from dangerous targets. Just remember that you cannot cast 2 spells per round unless the remaining spell is a cantrip, right? You can use a bonus spell and then still cast a cantrip, which is nice to, let's say, avoid enemies with Misty Step and then still damage them, right? Now let's first start with cantrips. The reason I'm covering them is because they can be very useful in Solasta. After all, you have infinite uses of all your cantrips, and some of them even scale with levels. For example, Firebolt. By default it deals 1d10 fire damage. At level 5, 11 and 17 you'll get an extra dice increase. For 3d10 at level 12, quite a decent amount. What this means is cantrips will be your caster's main source of dealing damage due to their infinite uses, whenever you want or have to conserve full-blown spell slots and uses. Just rely on cantrips instead. There are many useful ones, but first we have Shadow Armor. It can only be cast on the character themselves, lasts 1 minute, and will provide you with an extra +3 temporary hit points. It might not seem like much, but at the beginning sections of the game it can help you quite a lot. Of course, because of the low duration you'll have to constantly cast it before battle, but since you have infinite uses it doesn't matter much. Firebolt is definitely the best cantrip for damage because it has the highest damage dice of them all, 1d10. Others are usually 1d8 only. On the other hand, the 1d8 cantrips all have a debuff associated with them. Chill Touch, for example, will prevent healing from the enemy, and also give disadvantage on undead enemies when attacking the caster, while Ray of Frost will reduce the enemy's movement by -2. Annoying Bee has even less damage, but a decent debuffing effect as well. It forces the enemies to roll concentration with disadvantage. The main use is for usually when the enemy is flying, right? Because if they fail on a concentration check when getting hit, they'll drop down to the ground, take damage and become prone for 1 round. Other than that, Light can be quite useful too. In all of the other Dungeons & Dragons games, Light was basically just there to provide a light source, right, visuals wise. In Solasta it also has gameplay benefits, as I've explained before in my main Solasta guide. If you attack an enemy that is unlit by any light source and you lack the Dark Vision ability, your attacks will incur in disadvantage, which highly reduces the chances of hitting. Plus, some enemies in the game, especially undead, like wraiths and vampires, have light sensitivity, which means they automatically attack at disadvantage whenever they are close to a light source. So quite handy to have. Huge duration, doesn't require concentration, at the very least cast it on your tank, who will be close to enemies. Sparkle can be quite good as well, and its main use is to ignite light sources. You can light up 3 objects. usually torches on the wall. And the best part is, if you do this under stealth, you will not be detected or start the battle. So it's amazing for the early game, especially the Sorcerer caves, which have plenty of unlit torches, and Sorcerers do gain advantages in darkness. The other cantrips are nowhere as useful. Stay away from Acid Splash and Poison Spray, because they require a saving throw, right? What's the point? If the enemy saves, they take no damage, and your cantrips are mostly there for the damage and the occasional debuff. You can also use Druid's Venomous Spike, because it does decent damage without a save. Just remember that for the secondary poison damage, well, some enemies in the game resist it, like Sorax most importantly. With cantrips out of the way, let's now cover level 1 spells, and I'll divide this guide between Arcane, spells such as cast by Wizard, Warlock and so on, and also the Divine spells from Druid and Cleric. Let's start with level 1 Arcane ones. Sleep is definitely the main attraction here, because unlike the other forms of crowd control, it works without a saving throw. You have to first roll 5d8, and then you can affect a total of enemies with hit points up to the point you rolled. So if you roll 20, you can affect an enemy with 20 hit points or 2 with 10. Like I said, because sleep is only based on hit points and not saving throws, it can be a powerful tool early, the best one even. Of course, if you are playing on Cataclysm, where enemies have bloated twice hit points, it's not going to work as efficiently. You actually have to reduce their hit points a bit before casting this, but it doesn't force a save or anything on subsequent rounds, so it's still very useful to take an enemy out of battle. Multiple ones even if you're playing on normal or even scavenger early. Shield is another great tool because it can be cast as a reaction. It only lasts for 1 round, and what it does is, if the enemy attacks your character and you have a shield use, if the enemy's attack would miss you, with the +5 bonus from shield, you can then cast shield as a reaction. Of course the attack is going to miss, and then the shield AC bonus will last until your next round comes, because as a reaction it will be cast during the enemy's turn. Identify is the main way of identifying items instead of paying shopkeepers, so it can certainly help. Plus, as a ritual spell, which are the spells with this little book icon here, you can cast it an infinite amount of times. It takes 10 minutes, but in the game is pretty much instant. We'll wipe your buffs out, though some of them anyways, at least the ones that last very short. Of course, you can always just pay a shopkeeper. Detect Magic has the same purpose, because usually you have to first cast Detect Magic to see if the items you're carrying are magical in nature, and then you cast Identify to actually know what they're all about. Long Strider is a great buff, because it lasts 1 whole hour, does not require concentration, and increases the movement speed of any ally by +2, ideally on your tanks, or characters that are melee and have to reach the enemy first. Mage Armor is as always quite handy. It sets your armor class to 13 instead of the base 10, and you can still benefit from dexterity bonuses. Plus the duration is huge and it can be cast on any ally. Fog Cloud is another amazing early spell because just like Sleep, it doesn't offer a saving throw, it always works. When you cast this, enemies inside the area will become obscured, which means they'll lack vision, so they'll have to move away from the area of effect to, for example, target you with ranged attacks or spells. Of course, because they can move and still attack, ideally you want to block a huge area with this, or cast it at a choke point as to force the enemies to move closer to you. Great when you combine it with lingering area of effect damage spells. Grease, I'm afraid, is nowhere near as good as it was in Pathfinder. The area is just too small. You might as well cast Sleep. And don't forget, all of these spells, including Sleep, have friendly fire, right? So don't cast it on top of your allies. Charm Person is probably the best of the saving throw based crowd control spells early on. It will make an enemy charmed for 1 hour, which is huge. Enough for the whole battle, of course. But has a will saving throw, and every round the enemy gets to make the save again. If you can go for Sleep, just do it instead, because at least then the enemy doesn't have a chance to resist. False Life can be decent too to provide more hit points as temporary HP, but earlier you might as well just go for Shadow Armor instead, because you won't have the level 1 slots to spare. It can offer more than double the bonuses from Shadow Armor and also has much higher duration at 1 hour, so you really only need to cast it once, and can be increased when you cast it as a higher level spell. Don't forget temporary HP sources in Solasta will not stack, so you cannot combine False Life with Shadow Armor. Lastly, for level 1 spells we have the ever so classic Magic Missile. By default it fires 3 rays, each dealing 1d4 plus 1 force damage, which is good because enemies don't really resist force. The best part is that it also cannot miss at all. All the rays will always hit enemies and you can hit multiple ones even. Now let's go for our level 2 arcane spells. Scorching Ray will be your main tool for single target damage for quite a while. It only gets outclassed by Disintegrate, which comes way later. It fires 3 rays at once, just like Magic Missile, and each deals 2d6 fire damage. The rays require a spell roll to hit. In Solasta you don't really have melee or range touch attacks. The spells that require a 2-hit chance, they are based on your spell modifier. Anyways, the best part is for each spell slot above level 2, Scorching Ray will get an extra target, which essentially means an extra ray for an extra 2d6 damage. 14d6 fire damage at level 12, quite useful. Plus it doesn't offer a saving throw for half damage. Besides that, it's mostly Misty Step because it can be cast as a bonus action. It's great for when you have to move away from enemies, but without incurring in attacks of opportunity because they are too close to you, or even to teleport to some areas of the map like elevated areas and so on. You can even use it to get some secrets too. Blur is one of the best defensive tools, but it can only be cast on your character themselves. It lasts 1 minute, so just for one battle, but it makes all attacks against you incur at disadvantage. Of course, it does require concentration, so unless you want a tank with your wizard, I wouldn't really bother with this. Dark Vision can only help if you're playing a human, which lacks it by default, because at the very least it doesn't require concentration and lasts for a godly amount of time. Lastly, we have See Invisibility. It also lasts very long, doesn't require concentration, unless your character pierces through invisibility. Now, this is rather situational, right? Usually, in the main campaign, only the Sorcerer assassin enemies go invisible, so if you aren't fighting Sorcerers, don't bother casting this. There's also Hag enemies in the Lost Valley DLC, but that's pretty much just it. Now let's cover our level 3 spells, and this is when things start getting really fun. First with the ever so classic Fireball, just like Magic Missile. It hits a huge area and deals by default 8d6 fire damage with a dexterity save for half. For each level above 3, Fireball will get an extra die of damage, for even higher than 10d6 later on. Kinda like the usual Fireball spell from 3rd edition, except even higher here. Of course, if you're playing on Cataclysm, where enemies have a lot of hit points, and you're better off with crowd control spells, well, I wouldn't bother with Fireball, but for Scavenger and Normal it's certainly a great tool, and you can one-shot some enemies with this. Not all of them, especially not later, but some of the weaker enemies definitely, because they won't have high hit points on these difficulties. While Fireball is great for damage, Hypnotic Pattern is one of the best crowd control spells. It targets Wisdom, and well, it will pretty much prevent all enemies inside the area that fail the save from taking actions, but of course they get to roll a saving throw again on every round to break free from the effect. It's just that for a wizard or sorcerer, you don't really have many other huge area of effect crowd control spells until Hypnotic Pattern. We of course can't forget Haste. It's always been amazing, overpowered even, and it's still quite powerful in Solasta as well. Haste will double your movement speed, grant you a +2 to armor class, bonuses to dexterity saving throws as advantage, and the best part, you can take one more action per turn. And you can use it for almost anything, most importantly attacking, but also dashing, dodging, disengaging, hiding, and using items. If you haste your tank, for example, they can then take the dodge action to avoid hits and still retain the ability to attack. Note that you cannot cast multiple spells with this, however, unfortunately. It does require concentration, but the effect is certainly powerful enough to warrant it. Counter Spell is another amazing pick. Just like Shield, it's cast as a reaction, and you can use this to prevent enemies from casting spells. Whenever they cast a spell and you meet the corresponding check, you can use Counter Spell to immediately block the effect. Great because it comes during the enemy's turn, as a reaction of course. Now let's get into level 4 arcane spells. Greater Invisibility is probably the strongest defensive tool in the game. It can be cast on any party member. and has quite stacked benefits. First, you'll have advantage on attacks. Enemies, meanwhile, will have disadvantage when attempting to attack you, and you remain invisible even when attacking and casting spells, for 1 minute duration, the entire battle of course. The fact enemies cannot reliably target you is even better, unless they can see through invisibility, and most enemies cannot. Fire Shield can be a handy tool too. It lasts a decent 10 minutes, doesn't require concentration, and can provide you resistance, which means half damage taken from either fire or cold. Usually it's going to be fire, for the main campaign at least, because well, 2 areas for the main quest are all about enemies with fire damage. Wall of Fire can be great for area of effect damage too. First, the area of effect is quite huge, and the best choice is definitely the outer ring. You can choose between a line, which is very poor, the outer ring and inner ring. Inner ring lets you apply the area in a square, right, a full square, but outer has a safety zone at the middle, which then spreads out into firewalls. So it's good to cast it on top of your characters, who will benefit from the safe zone, while forcing the enemies to burn themselves if they try to get close to attack you. The damage is 5d8 fire, quite decent, because it does not allow a saving throw at all. Sadly, it doesn't gain any bonuses from casting it as a higher level spell, it's just for more uses. Don't forget, multiple walls of fire will stack if cast from multiple characters, because it requires concentration. Last but not least, for level 4 spells we have Banishment, and this is, to put it simply, definitely the best crowd control spell in the whole game. But ideally, you want to wait until level 5 to start casting it, because here's what Banishment does. By default, it only hits one target. The enemy has to make a charisma saving throw, which is great because, just like player characters, enemies tend to dump their charisma, if you know what I mean. So even on Cataclysm, most enemies won't have high charisma saving throws. Enemies that are banished will be taken out for the whole battle, just like that. It's almost as if instantly killing them. Plus, it does not require a saving throw on every subsequent round, unlike pretty much all other forms of crowd control. You hit the enemy with this once and they'll be banished, just like that, forever almost. Now, whenever casting this as a higher level spell, you'll get to add an additional target, and this is when the spell becomes really good. After all, being able to banish 2 enemies as a level 5 spell, or even 3 as a precious level 6 spell slot, where we can highly change the tide of battle into your favor. As a matter of fact, you can instantly kill enemies with Banishment, so long as they are extra planar, that is, Celestial, Fiend or Elemental. Mostly Elementals. Solasta during the mid and most importantly late game has a lot of Elemental battles, and Elementals are probably the tankiest enemies in the game. They hit hard, have multiple attacks, also have a lot of hit points, even resistant to damage, so being able to instantly kill them with Banishment is great. If the enemy is not of these types, whenever you kill all of the remaining targets, you'll then have to unleash the enemy and bring them back to the game to finish the battle, and of course you'll have to defeat them. But you know, it's all about divide and conquer. Who cares if you have to kill the enemy later? The point is that you highly reduce the amount of enemies attacking you for a time, including dangerous targets. Honestly, Banishment is so good that as soon as I get level 5 spell slots, I just start spamming it. Even better with multiple characters because it does require concentration. I mean, one of my parties had 2 Warlocks and a Druid, which meant I could banish around 6 enemies in just one turn. That's almost the entire enemy pack, leaving just one poor enemy left. And you can then unleash the banished enemies one at a time. Conjure minor elementals, well, it can help only if you aren't a Druid or 3 Warlock, because Wizards and Sorcerers, unless you are a Green Mage Wizard that is, you don't really get any other summon spells until this point. It's just that the elementals aren't particularly strong, at least not the ones from this spell. But you know, it's a summon, and if you want to summon as a wizard, you have to pick it now. Stone Skin, I'm afraid, is quite costly to use. It requires concentration, even 100 gold, but the effect can be decent by providing resistance, which means half damage taken from physical blows. It's just that by the time you can cast this, chances are your tank will already have a decent amount of AC, even for Cataclysm, because remember, you have the dodge action too, to help you avoid hits further. Now let's go for level 5 arcane spells. You might have noticed level 5 and 6 spells, you don't have many ones compared to the earlier spells. Pathfinder also suffers from this issue, Baldur's Gate does not, however. Anyways, for level 5, the best pick is definitely Conjure Elemental. This is the ultimate summon in the game, as simple as that. You can choose between air, earth or fire. Ideally you want the air elemental. Fire is the worst because it has lower attack bonus or to hit chance than air and earth. But air is unique in that it can not only fly, but also has amazing movement, meaning it can easily hit any target, no matter if they're above, below you, being blocked by other characters, it doesn't matter, the air elemental just flies over everything. Each elemental has 2 attacks per round and can do around 15 damage per hit, which is quite good. Second, they are amazing for tanking too, because they have resistance to physical blows for non-magical weapon attacks. Just like the Stone Skin spell, except for them, it's an innate quality. And you might say, oh, it's non-magical attacks, but here's the thing, in Solasta, 95% of enemies do not have magical attacks at all. Even late game enemies, even during the final boss battle, a lot of enemies don't. So it's very handy to have this on a summon. Of course, as with most other summoning spells, it requires concentration, but Elemental is so good, especially when it comes to shifting action economy into your favor, that it's worth the concentration slot. Cone of Cold can be handy too, because if anything, the cone targeting, well, it's actually a huge area of effect. You can hit multiple enemies easily with this. It's just that the saving throw is Constitution, which tends to be among the highest enemy saves. The damage is also not that amazing or anything, 88. But let's say you're fighting something immune to fire, so you cannot benefit from Fireball, well, you might as well go for Cone of Cold if you want to blast them. Mind Twist, I'm afraid, is pretty poor, at least as far as the current version of the game. As I was reading some guides from the past, they always said the spell was amazing. I don't think so, at least not nowadays. While the effect is quite powerful, it does 10d4 psychic damage, enemies also don't resist it, and also has a saving throw based on intelligence, which also tends to be low, just like Charisma. If the enemy fails, they'll become incapacitated, so it stops them from taking any action for 1 round. Anyways, the main issue is the targeting of the spell, because it's cast at point blank range. The area of effect emanates from your caster. Because only the Arcane casters get this, like Sorcerer, Warlock and Wizard, well, chances are, I imagine most players will not be tanking directly with these characters, so getting them close to the enemies can be a bit troublesome. I wouldn't bother with it. Now at last we are at level 6 spells. While it is true that Solasta has up to level 8, all the main campaigns, both Lost Valley and Crown of the Magister, they only go up to level 12, so you only have up to level 6 spells. There's 2 main spells that stand out here. The first is Disintegrate. The damage it can deal is huge, 10d6 plus a massive plus 40 static force damage. On the other hand, Saving will negate the spell effect fully, it's not even for half. But at the point you can cast this, especially as a sorcerer, you can reliably hit it. Second, we have Chain Lightning. It deals 10d8 electric damage and can hit up to 4 entire targets at once. The best part is, it doesn't have friendly fire, right? Because it only hits enemies. But the enemies have to be somewhat close to each other. But honestly, I would rather just cast Banishment as a level 6 spell to instantly kill 3 enemies. Pretty much. I suppose you could use something like Hilarity too. It's just that it only works on a single target, right? Like I said, it might as well just go for Banishment, because you'll only have a single level 6 spell slot per rest at level 12. Now for the second part of this guide, it's time to cover the Divine spells that last from Cleric and Druid. Level 1 Cleric spells are quite stacked, there's a lot of useful ones here. First, Shield of Faith. It's your main source of increasing armor class early on. It grants a +2 to AC. And AC boosts in Solasta, they all stack with each other, although they are very rare. It lasts 10 minutes, certainly enough for multiple battles, can be cast on any ally, and here's the best part. It's cast by default as a bonus action, which means you can attack in the same round you cast this. Second, we have Healing Word, which will be the most useful way of healing our characters during battle, because just like Shield of Faith, it can also be cast as a bonus action. Now, the healing effect isn't as strong as, let's say, Cure Wounds, but the fact it's a bonus action is what makes it so good. Cure Wounds is better for out-of-battle healing. Blast is pretty great too. It can target up to 3 allies at once, and the effect is very strong. your allies will get an extra 1d4 added to their attacks and saving throws. As I've explained before, Solasta is a low numbers game, so having +1 to +4 to your attacks and saves actually does matter a lot when it comes to hitting the enemy or passing saving throws, no matter the point you're at in the game, but especially for later where enemies tend to have higher AC. Now, understand that Bless requires concentration, right? So you kinda have to choose between Shield of Faith or Bless. I imagine if you only have a single Cleric, you might as well go with Shield of Faith for tanking. Guiding Bolt is another favorite spell of mine, for the early parts of the game at least. First, it deals quite a decent amount of damage for the 6 Radiant, which enemies also don't tend to resist. Plus, without a save, it will debuff the enemies by making the next attack you hit them with incur in advantage. It's just for a single attack afterwards, from any ally even. But well, it's a built-in effect for free together with damage, what's not to love, right? Plus, it's a ranged attack too. Inflict Wounds can deal decent damage too, is 3d10. Necrotic, I don't think there's any other low-level spell that deals as much. Without a saving throw as well. It does require a melee hit, but chances are your Cleric will be close to the enemies anyways. Bane is the opposite of Bless, right? It debuffs the enemies with 1d4 less to their rolls. It's just that it has a saving throw, although it's Charisma, right? Which tends to be low. And once again requires concentration, so you kinda have to pick between Shield of Faith, Bless and Bane. There's also a level 1 nature spell that really stands out. Goodberry, one of the best utility spells in the game. It doesn't really have any gameplay benefit during battle. Its main use is to provide food for your party, which is required whenever you want to rest, even while traveling through the world map. Food rations are quite heavy to carry around in big amounts, so by just having, let's say, a druid with the Goodberry spell or a ranger, your character will automatically cast it whenever traveling through the world map as you rest. And you can also just cast it before resting during map areas and dungeons. Now it's time to talk about level 2 divine spells, and I want to start with nature ones because Spike Growth, which is only available to druids, rangers and also the 3 Warlock, well, to put it simply, it's the most busted spell in the whole game. Despite being just a level 2 spell, there really is nothing quite like it. Here's what the spell does. It creates a dangerous area, and whenever the enemies or your own characters even try to move past it, for each square they move, they will incur in 2d4 piercing damage, while also slowing them down, so it won't be that easy to get away from it. The best part is, of course, Spike Growth can stack with itself if you cast it from multiple characters. I have 3 characters here capable of casting it, and the end result is simple. The enemies just melt and kill themselves by trying to come towards your characters. It really is the ultimate tool for easily handling enemies, even on Cataclysm mode with their bloated hit points. If anything, is actually the way to go there, right? Because the other spells just don't compare. Now, because enemies are smart enough to move away or around the area of effect, there's 2 main ways of using this properly. First, by casting it on top of as many enemies you can. This way, they will have to spend some time moving to get away from the area of effect. Second, and the best one, is at choke points, of course, because then they have no choice but to move and destroy themselves on your Spike Growths. Level 2 nature spells are quite stacked, but still have another amazing one. Pass Without a Trace. This is the ultimate stealth boost in the game, lasts 1 hour, hits up to 6 targets, so you can hit everyone in your party, including pets, including even guest characters. And what it does is, it increases the stealth check of your characters by a huge +10. Whenever your characters attack from stealth, they have to make a stealth check per action not to be detected by the enemy. Because the bonus from Pass Without a Trace is so overwhelming, chances are around 90% of the time you will easily make the check, which means if you're playing with ranged characters and you have the enemies busy with your tank, your ranged allies are free to attack as many times as they want from stealth without being detected by the enemy, which of course means advantage on your attacks. Lastly, for level 2 nature spells, we have Heat Metal. The spell is quite unique for 2 reasons. Well, first, the downside is it only works on enemies wearing metal armor. Not all enemies do, but a lot of strong, heavy hitting, multiple attacking, bruiser type of enemies do. The best part is it does not offer a saving throw at all. It always works, so long as the enemy is wielding metal armor. It deals 2d8 damage, which is decentish, but the most important effect is all the attack rolls and ability checks of the target will be at disadvantage. Here's another fun part: as a bonus action, because the spell has 1 minute duration, you can reapply the damage per round, while still retaining the ability to attack, of course. Plus you get even higher damage if you cast this as a higher level spell, together with the nice debuff, of course. Now let's cover level 2 divine spells. The one that stands out the most here first as a buff is Aid. It lasts 8 hours, enough for any dungeon. It can hit 3 allies out of your 4 party members, and will increase their maximum hit points by +5, with extra boosts if you cast it as a higher level spell, which you should do if you have the slots to spare. I don't think it needs any saying, having +5 to +10, 15, even 20 extra hit points on 3 characters is really good, especially because it's not temporary hit points, right? It increases their actual hit points for the duration, which means you can then stack it with temporary HP. Second, we have Spiritual Weapon, and wow, this spell is quite busted. It's a summon spell, and to be fair, it's one of the best in the game, even as good as the Elementals, except it comes way earlier at level 2. Its main advantage is, unlike all the other summoning spells in the game, first, it does not require concentration, and second, it can be cast as a bonus action. This spell works like this: let's say you attack with your cleric, you can then immediately cast Spiritual Weapon as a bonus action, and then at the same turn you cast it, command the magical hammer summon to hit the enemy. The hammer deals force damage, quite good. And here's another amazing part: it's actually invulnerable, right? The enemies can't target it, it doesn't have a hit point score, it will stay there forever with you until battle ends. If you have a party of, let's say, 4 clerics, that's 4 extra attacks you get per round. Talk about action economy, right? It's definitely worth spamming into every battle. Calm Emotions, on the other hand, is by far the best earlier area of effect crowd control spell, especially because, unlike Sleep, it doesn't have a hit points cap. Also, it does not have friendly fire at all. The area of effect is great, and so is the effect. It makes enemies just stand there doing nothing. The saving throw is Charisma 2, also great. Now, the only downside to this spell is that it only works on humanoid enemies. But here's the thing: most of the enemies you fight in the game are actually humanoids, including orcs and goblins. For the elementals you have banishment anyways. Even most of the Sorax are also humanoids. For the best level 3 divine spells, first we have Spirit Guardians. It's really quite a busted spell too, not as overpowering as Spike Growth, but unlike that, this one does not have friendly fire at all. What it does is, it creates a nice aura in a pretty decent area of effect around your character, with great duration 10 minutes, and whenever the enemy moves inside the aura or spends a turn inside it, they will take 3d8 radiant damage, and this works per round. It does have a saving throw based on wisdom, but well, it still works quite amazingly as a reliable source of extra damage. Of course, it doesn't need any saying. Just like Spike Growth, you can stack multiple Spirit Guardians equal to the number of clerics you have at your party. If you have 4 battle clerics, which is optimal, that's 3, 6, 9, 12d8 radiant damage to all enemies around you per round. Quite overpowered. And you can of course increase damage by increasing the spell level. Second, we have Mass Healing Word. It's, well, essentially an area of effect version of Healing Word that works on up to 6 party members. And just like the normal Healing Word, it's cast as a bonus action, so will be your main source of area of effect healing during combat. Lastly, we have Daylight. This spell provides a massive source of light, and its best uses are against enemies, especially undead that are weak to light, such as vampires and wraiths. Just like the normal light cantrip, except the area of effect is way bigger. These enemies even take damage from being inside light. Plus, it does not require concentration. Revivify will be your main ability to revive allies earlier, but you can just cast it from scrolls instead if you have them, and the game is quite generous with those. I suppose Create Food also has its uses, if you don't have a character that can cast Good Berry, as I've explained before. For level 3 nature spells, the one that stands out above all others is Conjure Animal, Also your first summon monster spell in the entire game. The best use is to conjure 2 beasts, which provides you with 2 wolves. The wolves might not be as overpowered as a wolf pet from Pathfinder, but they are quite handy tools to have. While they have a large hitbox, they can move quite a lot, have pretty decent damage. Their attack rolls isn't the best, but it's enough to hit enemies when you cast this. And here's a very fun part, just like in Pathfinder, your wolves, whenever they attack the enemy, automatically attempt to trip and knock them down, together with damage, based on a strength saving throw. The fact you cast 2 wolves at once, and well, you can combine it on multiple characters, means you can have up to 8 wolves on at the same time. That's action economy. They'll probably end up blocking themselves though, depending on the map, because of their huge hitbox. Also, do note that the wolves have the special Pack Tactics ability. A pity your characters can't get it, but what it does is it makes them attack at advantage so long as they are nearby other allies. Quite handy to have too. Now we have level 4 Divine Spells. Banishment, as I said before, is amazing. Guardian of Faith can be useful too. It does not require concentration and it creates a statue on the ground that will constantly damage enemies nearby with 20 Radiant, just like Spirit Guardians, and you can combine both. It's just that the area of effect isn't that big, but it can work. Death Ward is rather situational. I mean, it doesn't require concentration, has huge duration, and essentially what it does is just like the Orc Ratio ability, whenever your character hits 0 hit points, their hit points will instead be set to 1, which of course means they can still die from subsequent attacks, but at least not from just one blow. Because it doesn't require concentration, I mean, you can use it if you want. Freedom of movement is the same, no concentration and huge duration, it's just that enemies in Solasta don't tend to paralyze your characters. Unlike, let's say, Pathfinder. Now let's cover level 5 Divine Spells. Honestly, they are mostly pretty poor, I'm afraid. You're better off increasing the spell level of Aid, Spirit Guardians, and Banishment. Even Spiritual Weapon too, because the summon does get bonuses to damage from it. But anyways, there's Raise Dead, but you can just use Revivify. It's just that the other spells aren't particularly good. I mean, Greater Restoration is amazing in Pathfinder, but in Solasta, like I said, for freedom of movement, enemies don't tend to debuff you with these effects here. Maybe on custom campaigns, but not the main quests. Now at last we have level 6 Divine Spells. They are mostly underwhelming, I'm afraid. Heal, at the very least, is the highest source of healing in the entire game, right? 70 is a huge amount, no other healing spell can come close. Hero's Feast can provide a nice bonus, it's just that this spell is extremely expensive at 1000 gold per cast. I would only save it for like the final boss battle, unless you have money to spare. And will provide advantage on Wisdom saving throws, immunity to poison and frightened, and also an increase of +10 to your maximum hit points. Blade Barrier can be used for some damage, it's just at this point in the game, especially with the Constitution saving throw, it's not really going to do that much. Might as well just cast Banishment again with more spell slots and targets. Level 5 nature spells are underwhelming too, and as far as level 6 ones, Conjure Phase kinda bad, I'm afraid. I mean, Conjure Elemental is way better and comes earlier. I tested all of the Fey options here, and they simply were not as good as the Elementals. Wall of Thorns can have its uses. At the very least the damage is huge, it's like 60-10 or something. And of course it can hit a huge area of effect while protecting your allies. And of course it can hit a huge area of effect while protecting your... allies inside the area. Well friends, so this was it for my best spells in Solasta guide, and I really think I covered everything possible here. If you found this guide useful as always, please remember to like, subscribe, and even consider becoming a channel member. I really appreciate your support. Thank you for watching and see you next time, friends.